pange jah, tõesti allkirjalehele oma nimed ja haarake endale suu ja jooki kõrvale ja tehke olemine mugavaks. Ja siis me peagi alustame. Head inimesed, kell on 3:30. Tere tulemast kõigile. Minu nimi on Dagmar Narusson, ma juhatan selle õhtupooliku pärastlõuna sisse. Ja tõesti, me oleme siin juba veetnud pool päeva, ma tõstan mikrofonid lähemale, jah, siis on paremini kuulda. Me oleme juba veetnud siin pool päeva, alustasime kell 10 hommikul. Auditooriumis inimesed on vahetunud. Ja Cormac Russell on ka meiega olnud juba hommikust peale. Ma räägin lühidalt, et miks Tartus ja miks ülikooliga seoses. Mina olen Tartu Ülikoolis õppejõud ja teadur ja 5 aastat on kindlasti olnud see aeg, kus ma olen lugenud, kuulanud Cormac Russelli kõnesid ja lugenud raamatuid, tekste ja olnud inspireeritud ja jätkuvalt olen inspireeritud. Ja kui me 2020 sügisel alustasime Tartu Ülikoolis kogukondade arendamise ja sotsiaalse heaolu õppekavaga, siis sügissemestril me juba ka tutvustasime Cormac Russelli ideid ja ABCD ehk siis Asset-Based Community Development vaadet. Ja see eellugu on olnud see, et esialgu me tutvustasime, siis 2023 ehk siis aasta tagasi oli meil esimest korda võimalus kuulata Cormac Russelli loengut online'is, ta oli meiega ja meie magistrantidega ja me mõtlesime koos kogukondade arendamise praeguste suundade üle. Sügisel jätkus ja kuulas Cormacit juba suurem hulk rahvast, meil oli kogukonna konverents. Ja siis me unistasime siin ja mitmete inimestega, et me tahaksime päriselt pealahast jalatallani kogeda Cormacit ühes ruumis ja kuulata tema mõtteid. Ja täna on see õnnelik päev, et me oleme Tartus koos. Need, kes on juba hommikupoole siin olnud, on väga inspireerunud. Mina küll olen, ma julgen öelda, et teised ka. Mõnen noogutusi. Ja me jätkame ja meil on aega 2,5 tundi kokku. See aeg on jagatud niimoodi, et esimeses osas räägib Cormac Russell ja ta teeb siia oma teema käsitlemisse ka pause, kus te saate esitada küsimusi, peegeldada ja siis ta jätkab. Ja lõpuosas me räägime Eesti näidetest. Meil on siin inimesi, kes on valmis tutvustama seda, mida parasjagu erinevates paikades tehakse. Aga nüüd ma annan Ehale sõna, sest et Tartu päev on ainult 1 päev kogu selles pikas jadas ja ringreisis. Et sa saad rääkida sellest.
Peab käes olema 2 seda, ma ei ole kunagi kogenud, ma räägin 2 mikrofoni, väga äge. Tere minu poolt ka, et ma kõigepealt ütleks, miks ma üldse siin räägin, sest ma olen Eesti Rahvaülikoolide Liidu juures projektijuht. Ja ma ei ole lihtsalt projektijuht, ma olen kaasprojektijuht, sest minu taga seisab Helerin, lehvitab ja tema on ka projektijuht. Ja me oleme sellise projektijuhid nagu strateegiline partnerlus Siseministeeriumiga, eesmärgiga edendada siis seda kogukonna teemat Eestis. Ja me ei tee Rahvaülikoolide Liiduga seda üksi, vaid tegelikult on meil päris suur meeskond selja taga ja huvitav on see, et ajas see meeskond mulle tundub kogu aeg kasvab. Nii et algselt oli siis Eesti Rahvaülikoolide Liit koostöös Maakonna Arenduskeskustega, nii et kõik 15 Maakonna Arenduskeskust on meil kampas ja seal nende esindaja lehvitas ja teine esindaja ja 3. esindaja, et siin on Maakonna Arenduskeskuse inimesi päris kenasti, aga meil on abis ka siis Tartu Ülikool ja Eesti Koostöö Kogu ning üks väike osaühing Toimevõimendi, kes meie juurde toob sellist kriisitarkust. Aga selle konkreetse visiidi ja seminaride osas tulid meile veel appi Eesti Kunstiakadeemia, Tallinna Ülikooli rahvas, Lapse Heaolu Arengukeskus ja siis on meil veel Kultuurkapital appi tulnud ja Äksi ning Järva-Jaani kogukonnad. Ja täna hommikupoole inimestega vesteldes mulle tundub, et varsti see meeskond läheb veel suuremaks, nii et jah, et see on suur koostöö. Ja ma arvan ka, et kõik need partnerid väärivad aplausi. Ja visiidis siis taustaks, kui pressiteatest välja ei lugenud kõik, et Cormac siis eile oli meiega Tallinnas, siis me rääkisime omavalitsuste ja kogukondade tasakaalust, tuli juttu elevandist ja hiirest, kumb on kumb, võib iga üks ise mõelda, ja käisime Kalamaja muuseumis külas ning siis jõudsime õhtul Tartu ja homme, kui me siit täna lõpetame, siis homme oleme me külas Äksi kogukonnas ja seal tuleb juttu just kogukonnatööst eakate suunal, vananevas ühiskonnas ja Järva-Jaani on see koht, kuhu tasub minna, et uudistada, kuidas nad ikkagi on suutnud näha väga keerulistes olukordades võimalusi ja ressursse. Et seda me siis homme lähmegi sinna vaatama ja arutlema, kuidas seda ressursipõhist lähenemist sellistes endistes keskustes saaks edendada. Ja loodame, et me siis kella 4 jõuame lennujaama ja ta ikkagi õnnelikult lennuki peale pandud. Aga veel ma tahaks teile öelda, et tegelikult see seminar nii täna hommikupoole kui ka eile, kõik need küsimused ja teemad, mis üles kerkivad, me tegelikult märgime need ülesse ja me töötame nendega edasi, et see jääb meie meeskonna töölauale ja saame lubada, et see ei sumbu sellesse nädalasse, vaid me töötame ikkagi, et kogukondade arendamise sisu ja tähendus võimalikult paljude inimesteni jõuaks ja see keskkond Eestis soosiks kogukondade toimetamist. Nii et aitäh ja mõnusat päeva!
Ja meil on praegu ka ülekanne toimumas, need tervitused kõigile, kes vaatavad meid praegu üle veebi ja ma tean, et seal on meie kogukondadest koostööpartnereid, need tervitused teile, Vormsile ja Pöidesse ja igale poole mujale. Now, I give turn to you. It was long introduction, but we shortly explained the background of the project and the meeting here. But now I give turn to you.
Thank you.
I apologize that you had to hold.
Oh, I need both.
Two. Oh, one. Okay. Okay. Lucky.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. Good to be with you. Thanks for making time to be in conversation about something I think that's hugely important, but often undervalued, and that's community. Now, the first thing I have to figure out is where's the best place to stand so you can see the slides. And we've got some people joining us online. Hello, everybody online. I'm sure you're on land somewhere, so hello. Good to have you with us. And good, again, I think, to also be joined by so many young people. That's, I think, really special. So welcome, especially all our young people. It's great to have you with us. We might actually talk some sense this afternoon. What I'd like to do is start with a story. And it's a story that appears in the latest book, The Connected Community. And I think the two books are going around the room right now. And it's a simple story. It's a story that John McKnight, my co-author, shares a lot. It's his story, so I share it on his behalf. But it's a story about the first time when he was a younger man. He's 93 years young now, but when he was younger, he used to come to Ireland quite regularly because he enjoyed fishing, and there's some good fishing to be had in Ireland. And so he would come in from the United States, from Chicago, where he's based, and he would bring his telescopic fishing rod, so it breaks into little pieces and it self-assembles. And he was, where the story is set, he was down in a rural village in Kerry, and he had no bait to go fishing. And so he went into a little rural shop a store, and he went in with his broad Chicago accent, and he said to this kerryman behind the counter, "Do you sell any bait?" And the kerryman said to him, "Now, when you say bait, what exactly do you mean?" And he said, "Well, like worms?" And he went, "Ah, worms." He said, "Well, now, here's what I'll tell you to do. Turn around and walk out the door you came in, and just outside by the entrance, there's little flagstones on the ground. If you lift one of them up, you'll get all the bait you need." And I really love that story because here was John, right, who talks so much about community assets, thinking that his solution was in the marketplace, when actually it was right under his nose. And I think that's a good way to think about communities. Now, often the assets are hidden under all kinds of metaphorical flagstones. Maybe it's the labels that we're giving people. Oh, that group of people, they've got mental health issues. Or that group of people, they have intellectual disabilities. Or those people are homeless. So often we use labels that obscure the gifts of the people, the contributions. That it's really interesting, isn't it, to think about this, that we define homeless people by the one thing they don't have, a home, right? But actually, what you begin to think about, I think, through the asset-based lens is that while it's important to acknowledge these issues, I don't want to minimize them, it's also important not to define the identity of a person by a particular crisis, challenge, trauma, or an inequity that they're experiencing. So I like that story about the worms because it reminds us that in all kinds of ways that the assets that enable a good life may in fact not be there as clearly as we think. We might actually have to make those assets visible. So one of the ways I think we can do that is to recognize, particularly if we're coming in and we're working with communities, and some of you I know are, it's to recognize that there are all kinds of ways, I think, that we can come in and have conversations with communities. In terms of asset-based community development, I know many of you are here to learn more about the approach. I think in the very early days, when we started trying to understand what the power of community really was, one of the things that we noticed was people had been in the communities before us. So outsiders arrived before we did. In the very, very early stages when John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann, who were two founders of asset-based community development, actually went into 300 neighborhoods across 20 cities in North America, they found that what had happened was a lot of universities and other public sector organizations had been in those 300 communities before they arrived. And the questions that they had asked people were questions about what's wrong with you, what's broken, what's deficient, where's the damage, right? So in a sense, they were lifting up the flagstone in the story I told you about the worms, but they were looking for problems. Now, the reason that they were looking for problems, I think, is because they needed to establish that the community that they were studying needed them. Or else they were being paid by an institution who said, you know, we've got some money to spend on health. Go study that neighborhood and tell us where it's sick. So then we can provide a health service, which is actually a sickness service, right, for them. So when John and Jody came into communities, they thought, well, the first thing we've got to change is we've got to change the way that we show up. We've got to have a different conversation. So instead of asking the community, what's wrong, what's broken, what are the issues, what makes you angry, they said, how about you tell us stories about a time that you and your neighbors joined together in this place and made things better. And they did that. They didn't have sample groups or study groups. They went into the neighborhoods and they spent time in the neighborhoods with people, living their lives. So at 4 p.m., when parents were collecting the kids from school, they would come and say, you know, I'd like to have a conversation. We're visiting the neighborhood. Can you tell us some, you know, good examples of where you've seen folks get together and improve things around here? And invariably, they found that there were stories to tell, even in the neighborhoods that were most defined as disadvantaged or problematic or low-income neighborhoods. They found that people had stories which were stories that were really about them being effective. Stories about how they were using their building blocks, their assets in a local context to make things better. So here you have two conversations. You have the conversation I just described, John and Jody's, which is lifting the flagstone up and finding the worms. And then you've got the conversation that went before, which is the conversation which basically was about mapping misery, right? So you got the misery mappers and you got the treasure hunters. And hopefully in this room, we've got a room full of treasure hunters interested in lifting up the flagstone, but maybe not. Maybe your whole sort of livelihood depends on proving that the places that you're going into are needy and broken and efficient and damaged. And if so, you're still welcome, okay? I'm not judging you because you're not unusual. Most organizations today employ people to fix broken people. Otherwise, why would they exist? One of the interesting things I think about a lot of our organizations in the public sector is that they need people's needs. Does that make sense to you? Much in the same way that the steel industry needs iron ore. That's what it consumes to produce things. Institutions consume people's needs. That's why we do needs assessments. And then we use those assessments to do things to people and for people. But I think that conversation is shifting around the world. I really do. I believe that very firmly. In fact, I'm seeing very clear evidence of where we're seeing public sector organizations recognize that actually there are different ways of working with communities that is less about finding what their needs are and then doing things to and for them, and more about joining them in solidarity, joining with them, and figuring out what it is they want to do by themselves, what they want to do with a little help, and what is it that because they have rights as citizens, they want done for them. And I'm really, really happy to be living in that time, because boy, do we need that approach, given the crises that we're dealing with across the world. And so I think I want to talk a little bit more about how we can lean into that and double down on that approach. And recognize, of course, I think we all do, that doing things top-down and unilaterally to communities is experienced as a form of violence, and it tends to net a really negative reaction. So thinking about a positive alternative, I like this idea. There's a lot about Saul Alinsky I disagree with. Saul Alinsky was a community organizer in the 40s and 50s. And I think he was too oriented to, getting communities to fight against the system. And he didn't spend enough time reminding communities that they can also be makers and creators, and that as well as changing the system, which matters sometimes, it's also possible that we could use community to build better lives together. But in any case, he does say some things that I think are worth paying a lot of attention to. And one of the things he says is captured here. Again, I'm mindful that I need to stand aside here. So you might see me jumping around. It's because I'm trying to stay in frame, but not get in your way of seeing the slides. So it's not always clear where I should stand. But in any case, he says, and let me read it to you, to give people help, which is often what an outsider is trying to do, while denying them a significant part in the action, contributes nothing to the development of the individual. He goes on to say, in the deepest sense, it is not giving, but taking their dignity. Denial of the opportunity for participation is the denial of human dignity and democracy. It will not work. This is really important because basically what he's saying is, if you want to help communities, whether you're a local leader in a neighborhood, in a village, in a town, or whether you're coming in from outside to help, you can't do it if you're not serious about the idea of putting the community in the driving seat. You cannot treat communities like passive recipients. It doesn't help them. It backfires. So it creates a counterproductive result. I like the work of a gentleman by the name of David Ellerman. He used to work for the World Bank. And he spent a long time thinking about why so much of the change that's being done in the global South isn't working. Why is it this great big authority with lots and lots of money isn't enabling countries develop, right? And he says that basically the reason is because they're breaking some golden rules. So he calls them the do's and the don'ts of development. And you could use these to think about help. He said, so the first do, if you're really serious about working in a community-sensitive way, is start from where people are. But he doesn't call people people. He doesn't refer to them as communities. He calls them doers. And I really like that. So immediately he's using a language that says the community are not passive. They're active agents of change. They are the doers in the relationship. We may be important as helpers, but we're not the doers. Most of the time, it's the community that's going to have to do the bulk of the change. So we have to start from where the doers are at, even if we don't like that. I mean, so often we come in, we've got research that says the big issue in this place is drugs. But actually, if the community say, well, sorry, the big issue for us is rats, then you start with the rats. You must start from where the community is at. You don't have to stay there. You can build through a process of trust all kinds of new possibilities, but it's important to start with where the energy is. The second point he makes is that we've got to try to recognize that most often if we're outsiders and we're employed by an organization, then we see through the eyes of that organization. We see through our specialism. If we're social workers or clinical psychologists or anthropologists even, we are trained. We're given a pair of glasses. We can't help it. It's not a fault. It's a reality. But part of what we have to try to do is set those glasses aside and really try to see not through the eyes of the state, but through the eyes of the community. And that's hard because many of us work in communities where there's a lot of disconnection. People are living in 9-story buildings. They don't know each other, right? So part of the challenge is to maybe even just recognize and see that. That's the starting point, and begin to grow on that. You're very welcome to have these slides, by the way. We're happy to share anything that I use today. The third do, so these are 3 do's, is respect the autonomy of the doers. It's really, really striking. How many times have projects been imposed on communities against their will because the research says they need it? Even if they don't realize they need it, they need it. And so in all kinds of ways, the autonomy or the sovereignty of the local place is not respected. And so he argues, I think rightly, that in an awful lot of the global South, in countries, think Indonesia and Africa and so forth, things have been parachuted into communities with scant regard for local culture, local autonomy, local sovereignty, and in some cases, quite outrageous and ridiculous solutions have been imposed by what they call NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And so, I don't know if you can think of examples, but I can think of oodles and lots of examples. I don't want to make you depressed. But one of the ones that often comes to mind for me is how very, very significant projects around dealing with water shortage bring in very, very complex, very, very sophisticated apparatus to actually pump water, and they are never used. because for all kinds of cultural reasons, it's not appropriate in that context to use those. So they lie idle, and then when the people don't use them, they're considered to be ignorant or deficient in some way. So it's used as proof that they need capacity building. So then they bring in an expert to train them in how to recognize how they should be more, I suppose, Western, I guess, in their mindset. And often what they're doing is they're killing culture. They're basically sending a message: you're a rural, stupid, ignorant hick. But it's okay, because we're here to educate you. I'm shocked by this, but it happens over and over again. You know, over the years in the work that I've done in East Africa and other countries, I've really been struck by how many times communities are solving their own problems, but we're not actually seeing the solution. I remember examples around AIDS and HIV and how it was the burial societies that were actually educating people around sexual health, not the health workers. And it's not to disregard the health workers, but I was really surprised that the health workers didn't know it was a good idea to start their work around, helping people think about different ways of being sexual by going through the associations. This is the difference, I think, between taking a community development approach and taking a medicalized approach. The medical model says you bring in an expert who has knowledge around medicine, you find out where things are going wrong, and then you bank the knowledge in their brains so they stop behaving so stupidly. Right? The community development approach says, let's discover first where in this sovereign space people are autonomously figuring out the solution to this. Where are the positive deviants? And then let's see if we can use our knowledge to lift them up, to feature them. Why is it that there are 5 mothers in one village that are boiling the rice and their children are living well beyond the age of 12? And in another village, 2 hours down the road, children are dying regularly under the age of 5. Let's find out. What is it that these 5 women are doing? And then let's enable these 5 women to talk to the other women in the village. But no, that's not what we do. What we do instead is we send a nutritionist in to run a 12-week program for the women in the other village. And we don't see the connection. One of the things that these rules do, I think, is they help us to really have some guidance, some limitations to how our helping operates. One of the great questions I think we can ask if we're mentoring people who are doing community development is, what did you not do this week to help the community? In many of the projects and institutions that we work in, we're paid to do things. We're paid to take leadership positions. We're paid to solve problems. Community development takes a different approach. It says, instead of featuring our expertise, our leadership, and our problem-solving skills, let's start by featuring, even if it's very modest, the early attempts in the community, even if they're visible. Like the Kerry man said to John, leave the store and go back into the community and lift the flagstone up again. So if needs assessments don't help us lift the flagstone, what does? Well, I think what does is these rules, starting from where people are and seeing through their eyes and respecting their autonomy. One of the ways of doing that is to stop doing needs assessment and to start having learning conversations in the neighborhood. Start asking people what's going on that they're proud of. Ask them to tell stories about how they got together to make things better. Ask them what resources are they using currently that enable them to be well. If you're working in neighborhoods where there's a lot of crime and you meet young people, maybe ask the question, if I was 14 and I was a black kid living in this neighborhood, what would I need to know to survive? And be prepared to have some shocking answers. Be prepared to hear that young person say, well, you would need to carry a knife and you would need to join a gang. That would be good for your health around here. You may not like to hear that, but that's that person's truth. And actually, they're probably right for now. But the question is, can you as a community development worker get in solidarity with that 14-year-old boy and help him join, him, her, they, join with other people? So their story is less a story about isolation and more a story about collaboration. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do. I'll speak for another few minutes. The idea here is I speak for about a half an hour, and then we take questions, discussion, and then I'll speak for another half an hour. So I'm coming to about my time. But I wanted to just say this these last 4 and 5 rules, because I think they're so important. These are the don'ts, the proscriptions, what we should not do. So he says, don't try to impose change on the doers. So this is really interesting, because what he's basically saying is he finds that an awful lot of people who are trying to help communities have preconceived ideas of what they think will fix the problem. They've even got preconceived ideas of what the problem is, right? Now, we know that whoever defines the issue holds the power. So if somebody comes in and says, you know what your problem is? And then they define the issue, they're the ones with the power. So that's not very respectful of our autonomy. So here he's saying, don't impose change on people, because it's a form of violence. It's a form of manipulation. It's a form of imposition. I would guess, I mean, I'm just here 2 days, but I would guess in many of the countries I work in, if people follow those 4 rules, that 75% of the initiatives that are currently operating in community would shut down immediately if we impose those rules. And I don't think I'm exaggerating, actually. I'm really, really struck by how many initiatives were started in community that nobody living in that community actually wanted. And you know how I know? I know because so many people come to my workshops, and their biggest question is, how do I get people to take ownership of the initiatives locally? That tells me something. That tells me that their initiatives weren't started by them, because if they were started by them, they'd own them. So they were started by somebody who said, well, if I build it, they will come. And they never come. Do you notice? Now that's bad news, but it's also good news, because it tells us that we should probably not do change to people because they experience it as violence. The good news is, if we create the conditions within which people can do change together, it creates liberation. Are we in the violence business or the liberation business? I think we're in the liberation business. So if we are, we need to be clear about what are our practices. People who impose violence on other people are pretty clear on their strategies. They know their theory of change. They know how it operates. We too must be very, very self-aware and reflective about our practice. What is our praxis? What is our practice? What is the tool of the trade? And I think part of it is having principles. We operate to principles. So we may be in an organization that says, oh, you're a community development worker, or you're paid to work with communities. But actually what they're saying a lot of the time to us is, go organize an event. Run a program. Get the community involved. We have a new policy now in Estonia about participation. Give them a kick up the ass and get them participating, for God's sake. They don't know what's good enough. So all of that we have to say no to as practitioners and as citizens. Say no, it won't work. I love this last one, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. Not to give help as an act of benevolence. I don't know how that translates, but let me just say it in plain English. That's basically saying we shouldn't give charity to people and expect in turn that they will be indebted to us, right? Keeping people dependent on charity. It's really interesting how many charities are basically continuing to keep the issue that demands the charity alive without realizing it. Food banks are a good example. I love some food banks because you go in and you can't tell the difference between the people who are volunteering in the food bank and the people who are receiving. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to not create dependency or stigma. They're trying to build solidarity around food sovereignty. In the UK, there's a trust called Trussell Trust. And they've recognized after many, many years of running thousands of food banks across the UK that it's not solving the poverty crisis. They recognize, of course, they don't want people to be hungry, so they continue to run the food banks. But they have employed 40 community organizers who are working to basically figure out how we can change society, change the social order and the structural inequality which has created a society where so many people need food banks. The best way to do charity is to change the social order that has created the need for that charity. Most of what people require in communities, most of what people need who are living in poverty is not relief action done to them or for them. What they really need is a change in social order, and they need to be the primary drivers of that change. So much of what community development does is it creates the conditions, the processes, and the structures by which that can happen. So what we thought we'd do is we'd stop now and see if what I've said provokes any reflections or questions. It's always really nice, I think, before we take questions, to spend a little time warming the room up, animating the room. So can I ask you, just for 2 or 3 minutes, to turn, maybe in groups of 3, turn to whoever's nearby you, or 2 or 4, or whatever makes sense, but cluster in small groups, and just quickly have a conversation with your neighbors about what struck you from what you've heard said so far. So just 2 or 3 minutes will suffice, and then we'll take some questions or reflections from the floor. Thank you. All right. So, a very quick interruption. Thank you. Because we're limited on time, and we're also trying to be inclusive of the people online, which is complex, but I think we're managing it quite well. So we're a hybrid gathering. So it might be that, I don't know, can we take questions from people who are watching online? Yeah? So, no, okay, all right. But we know you're there. But we'll try to share some of the reflections. They'll be able to hear yeah, good, okay. So let's see if we can do this. Let's go around. It may be that not every group wants to share, but it might be that we can hear from 3 or 4 people. You can share reflections if that's what you like, probably quite concise, but you can also ask some questions. So some of what you've heard may stimulate wonderings or questions. They're welcome. Or you may have something you'd like to share, you know, in terms of your own practice, some examples of where you've seen some of what I've talked about in practice. All is welcome, okay? So, who would like to get us started?
Yeah, I will move
You're going to go around, Dagmar, so thank you.
Yeah, let me know who wants to comment,
Who would like to
reflect,
share
questions.
a reflection with us?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
moved
okay.
here.
I have a volunteer here.
Okay.
Okay, I'll use my
Right
microphone, Dagmar. Save you running. No? Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you very much. It's working?
Is it working?
Thank you very much. I was wondering, I got from here that the background here is a lot international.
People can't hear you, so I'm wondering, is the mic, the mic isn't working? Okay. It's for the online people, but for the people in the room, you're going to have to project. Okay.
I got the idea the background was a lot international development and
Right.
sort of geographic community work.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could expand a bit how these principles work for like interest-based communities.
Okay.
For example, I work for a society of biologists,
Okay.
and yeah, just a bit.
Yeah,
more
okay.
about
Good, good, good. Thank you. Let's just go around and see if there are any other questions or reflections. So that's great.
Collect questions and then.
I'll remember, yeah.
Yeah.
Gentlemen,
Else
just
wants
here.
to- Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Dagmar. You're going to get your steps in, I think.
Everything is okay. I'm glad.
Thanks. Siin ei tööta või töötab? See ei tööta? Okei.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
We had some advanced participants in our group who already read your books, so it's different, but I haven't. So my personal feeling was that you have to check your ego at the door at first when you meet the community, and that's the first thing you have to do. Because when you're going with your own approaches, then you will fail. But it also means that you have to suppress your own kind of instincts, because your emotions and maybe your first instinct to help people, you have to switch from your kind of instrumental, not emotional part of brain to that instrumental part of brain, and just observe and listen. And that's, I guess it's very hard for the people who have so lot of empathy. And that's the first thing everybody has maybe to realize and check yourself,
Yeah.
your own ego, because it's your empathy and ego also contains that help that need to help. It's something.
So it's a lovely reflection. I think you've captured the essence of what I'm trying to convey very, very well. I'll come back on a couple of points around that, if I may, in a few minutes. But let me just check. Are there others that would like to share, reflect, question? So.
Listening to you now, I was reflecting on the topic that has been in the air, like yesterday and also today, and that was that quite often communities form around a common problem, and sometimes also like common enemy, often which is some institution or municipality. And also during this lunch we had this discussion, yes, that we are now in this conflict phase, but how can we proceed to this constructive dialogue? And then the question that has been kind of on my mind right now is this also something then that we are imposing, if we are kind of seeing that there is community forming, but it's around conflict, so should we somehow impose this constructive approach on them, or is this also this kind of colonization, like you are saying?
Yeah, great question. Good. So 3 really strong questions, stroke reflections. Anybody want to add anything that we haven't heard already? So are we happy to use those questions to ferment some?
Let's
Yeah?
use those,
Okay.
yeah.
So I think community is whatever you say it is, okay? So if you're a community of biologists, that's okay, that's great. I imagine that most of the people who would have affinity with other, scientists in that regard may also have other forms of community, not just that. But to use the point nevertheless, I mean, if we were to say take some of the core principles of ABCD and apply them in a community that's kind of, the affinity is around their professional or specialism. One of the things that might be interesting to do, and I've actually done this in a really interesting context, working with Eurocontrol. So Eurocontrol have responsibility for the flight pathway of all airplanes coming through European airspace. And they have a center in Brussels and one in Paris. And it was just interesting to kind of help them deal with one big dilemma that they have, which is around siloed approaches. So they didn't feel as a community of professionals they were working as well as they might together. And one of the things that was really interesting about that was, just to go back here, was when we, let's see if we can do this. When we started thinking with the professionals about how they felt in terms of their power to make change happen, a lot of what they were telling us was, and these are very highly qualified people, like they're the best of the best in terms of pilots and air traffic controllers, and then they get recruited to Eurocontrol because they're the cream of the crop. But a lot of the frontline practitioners were telling us that they felt that things were being done to or for them, but not enough collaboration was happening. It was interesting. I said to them, well, if, for example, you decided tomorrow morning to work to rule, so you only did what it says on your job specification, what would happen to Eurocontrol? And they all smiled and said it would grind to a halt. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So, in one story you tell me that you're controlled and top-down, the managers aren't giving you freedom to kind of really respect your specialism and your expertise. But out the other side of your mouth, you've just told me that actually most of what makes this operation work is your creativity, your workarounds, your ability to kind of fix problems on the spot. So they had one story that says we're controlled and oppressed, and another story that says actually a lot of what we're doing comes from creativity. So it was really striking, I think. One of the ways that we can use some of this dialogue is to talk with that community that you're describing about how much agency do you feel? How much influence do you feel? How much do you feel you can change society? One of the things that often people would say to me as professionals, and I say, what do you really want? And they'll say, I want my expertise to be used. I went to college, I've spent a long time, I know what's needed, I want people to listen to me, right? And one of the things, to go to your point around ego at the door, one of the things that we can say to this body of very wise and experienced and expert people is, you will never get your expertise used until you learn to be affective instead of effective. I want to explain that a little bit. So affective in English relates to trust. I'm in an affective relationship if you trust me. Not because I'm technically wise or because I have the right credentials, but because at some human level, we have an affective relationship. So I have affect, pathos, right? If I have an affective relationship, if I'm trusted, the likelihood that I'll be listened to when I supplement that relationship with expertise goes through the roof. One of the challenges with many experts, particularly when they're as wise and as knowledgeable as your fraternity may be, is that much of their time is spent trying to be effective and solve technical problems. But most of the problems that they're going to need to solve in the future aren't technical, they're relational. They will not be about them using what they learned as marine biologists or whatever they are, but about how effectively they can build relationships with the communities that they're trying to influence. And mostly I'm going to guess that your fraternity didn't learn that in college. Maybe some. Well, hopefully, what we can convince a lot of those fraternities is to at least include a module on community development. Because I think that that is something that's really, really challenging in a lot of instances. The other thing that we did with Eurocontrol, which was kind of fun, this was as a way of breaking down silos, is we started asking people in the different departments what they enjoyed doing in their spare time. And then we invited them to do that together with people that they were having difficulty in different departments with. And we found that the siloed working actually started to break down. So it's really interesting to think about this, that we can have a technical way of knowing and being in the world, but we can also have a very associational way of being in the world. And sometimes the best way to build fraternity and build trust, even in, you know, the sense that you're describing, is not by a load of technical people sharing technical knowledge and writing, you know, peer-reviewed journals, but it's going and having a game of golf or, you know, playing cards. So I think years and years and years ago, in an awful lot of public sector and semi-state bodies, we would see quite a lot, and we have some research around this, we'd see quite a lot of different kinds of, I call them fraternities or associations. So there would be different clubs and groups within institutions. In around about the 90s, I don't know if this is true in this country, but around about the 90s, right into the noughties, that started to disappear in a lot of institutions. Maybe people would go for a drink on a Friday evening or a Thursday evening, but the clubs and the groups and the associational networks and the family get-togethers pretty much started to erode. I don't have proof of this one, but my working thesis is that that has done a huge amount of harm, both to the trust between communities, families, and institutions, but also within the institutions themselves as well. So there's just some thoughts. I hope they're useful. In relation to check your ego at the door, I love that. I mean, what we're trying to be is more eco, less ego, right? And in a sense, that piece around, you know, many people here coming to the conversation for the first time, I think that was a lovely way of simplifying what I was saying. And I think that really universalizes what I'm saying as well. So it isn't just about the Global South. I used some examples in the Global South. But I think those principles are relevant wherever we go, for teachers in classrooms, for doctors with patients, you know, for people who are working with any family, with any community, with any individual. And I think it's reasonable to assume that the person that you're serving has as sharp a mind and as noble a heart as you do. And this assumption that because I may have more technical know-how, that somehow I can foreground and privilege my credentials, and that makes me more or better than they are. And that itself, I think, is a major, major issue. And I think that's as relevant right here for this country as it is for Nairobi or wherever else. So there's something about this I want to just mention briefly, and it's to the point around many of the roles that are played as helpers are roles that are expert roles. And so people are in relationship, very understandably, with people that they think can help them. Okay, so in a sense, the danger with that is it's a one-up, one-down relationship. There's a power asymmetry. It's not anybody's fault, but it's almost automatically there. And we are trained to think in that way and behave in that way from a very young age. We go into the classroom, there's somebody at the front who knows everything, and there's the rest of the class. And I also know, by the way, that the rule of the game is, for me to get an A, lots of people behind me need to get a D, right? So in other words, I learned very early on that for me to win, others have to lose. That's the name of the game. And so that's very problematic. And I think part of what we're talking about is, in that role of a helper, there's lots you can do to not feed into that dynamic, starting with recognizing it's there. People are socialized into it. So if you know you're going to walk into a room, and the likelihood is that people who see you are going to think, finally, somebody who can do something, right? Your first challenge is to disrupt that story, because you're going to let them down. And to try to figure out, whoa, hang on. They have relocated their authority for this change-making effort to me. And it's like, you remember when you were kids in school, I don't know if you played this game, you know, of tag, you know, you touch, you're on. So it's almost like the community come up, you're on. We no longer have to worry about our health, that's your problem. Security, no, police deal with that. Politics, not working out so great, but politicians deal with that, right? And so we have this kind of narrative, which is not fair on anybody. And we're actually asking politicians, and we're asking doctors, and we're asking police to do the impossible. Because actually, there is no way, in no society I know, even in Scandinavian societies, say, well, they pay massive taxes, they're very happy with their public services. Yes, they are. Wonderful. But also, they need their social capital. So there is no example that I can think of in the 38 countries I work in, where by saying, let's unilaterally put all the responsibility for change making and help into the world of institutions and professionals and let them do our living for us, has worked. One of our Irish playwrights, Samuel Beckett, and I bet you know one of his plays at least, Waiting for Godot. Okay. He said that you're on earth. There is no cure for that. I think that says it all. So there's a whole set of things called the human story for which there is no medical, political, or justice-based intervention. And I think in many respects that should actually come with a sigh of relief, because it means that we matter, that our role in life, in families, in communities, in friendship circles, in informal networks, is really consequential in all kinds of very important ways. To your point, around this whole question of, and I'm paraphrasing, so please push back at me because it's, but what I've heard it too, you know, this kind of, the way I interpret it is, how do we deal with atomized societies, people that are kind of disconnected and not sort of combined together? How do we work with them without doing some kind of animation, but in the process of doing something to try and connect people or to try to support them to connect in an ABCD way? Are we not just doing the same thing? Are we not imposing ABCD on them? And I think that's a very important question. My sense of it is we've got some options here, right? One is we could just sit in our hands and do nothing, keep doing business as usual, okay? That's an option. A lot of people are doing that at the moment. Do more with less, run faster in this hamster wheel, see how's it working out for you? You happy? Keep doing that? Sound good? It's an option. The other option is to socially engineer the solution. You know, parachute more people in, push for more solutions that are grassroots, just try and stimulate it, you know, somehow. Not a great option. We have, the evidence is in on that. But what I want to propose to you is, that's an either-or framing of the narrative, okay? Either we do that or we do that, okay? I'm going to suggest there is a middle way. So I'm going to put on my Buddhist economics hat, and I'm going to suggest, I forgot, sorry. We sometimes have to use technology. But I'm going to suggest there is a middle way. That it's not, and I know you may come back and reframe it, but the way I heard you say it is any kind of working in the community by an outsider not a form of imposition? I think that's the way I heard the question. Was that your intention? Do you want to reframe the question? You'll have to project, though, I think, because people will...
that is also a good question, but my focus was more like in those situations where we see that, for example, the community is forming, but it's... and the question might also come like from some institutional perspective that the community is there, but it's in a very strict conflict, for example,
yes.
with the local municipality,
yes.
and there is this urge to help this community to resolve in being
yes.
in this conflict and become somehow constructive,
yes.
and that was really like the core situation,
sure.
or like more specific aspect of my question.
Yeah. Well, it may be that is something they need support with, but it may be that the municipality that they're in conflict with may not be the best way to provide that support right now. So it's not a question of whether they don't or they do need support, but it's a question of who is best placed to provide the support in any given instance. Because I would argue that the municipality may also need support in that instance. So the parties to the conflict need some support with the resolution, rather than saying, well, the community needs help in having a better relationship with the council. If there's a conflict, both parties need to take some ownership in order for it to be moved on. So a third party that actually is enabling some dialogue, some discourse, and maybe an embedded intermediary is really important at that moment. So, but I wanted to just kind of maybe go back to what I was saying earlier on around the instrumentality question. You know, is any form of outside-in support just another form of, manipulation? And I think the answer is it depends. So I think, or at least I would say that, because I'm going to argue that asset-based community development might be a useful way of not imposing, but actually stimulating a more ground-up approach. Many of you will be interested in working in communities where some form of stimulation or animation is required, because if you don't do anything, the likelihood is nothing will happen, or the negativity will just stay and will go down a sinkhole into an even deeper spiral of negativity. So something must be done. And all I wanted to try to say was that somewhere between the extremes of abandoning the community and social engineering is a middle way. And whether that's asset-based community development or other methodologies, because there are lots, and I'm not really that interested in promoting ABCD to you. I'm more interested in figuring out what might that middle way look like. And so that's part of where I'd like to go next. Can I just do a time check, Dagmar? How long do I have for this section if we're going to allow for questions?
Now we still have 1 hour.
Okay. So we have space, okay. So is it okay if I proceed then and try and build a little bit on this? So the middle way. Oh, let's go back here. And this is where we use an awful lot more, I think, of North American, US, UK, and other examples, European examples. So basic idea here is that when we're thinking about a middle way in between the extreme of social engineering and the extreme of doing nothing, part of what we're thinking about is, instead of delivering the solution, how can we start with this process of discovery, okay? How can we actually, if we're coming in and we're trying to be in a community, how can we start, and I suppose as outsiders, if we're outsiders, how can we be useful outsiders? Now, one of the ways I think outsiders can be very, very useful is sometimes they can support the community to discover things that might not be apparent, which include maybe that they don't just care about the issues that they're in conflict with the local authority about, but there's lots and lots of other issues that are equally animating that they care about as well. And in fact, what's happening is 80% of their time is taken with that conflict issue, which they'd rather be going elsewhere. And then they decide how they want to apportion their time. And this is actually a really important point. How much energy and time is given over by communities dealing with outside agencies in all kinds of ways, either speaking nicely to them to try to cajole them, or arguing with them, or negotiating with them, or filling out forms, or running through red tape and bureaucracy. That's absolutely energy sapping. And that's energy that is lost for other things. And often people don't necessarily get the space to make a decision. Nobody sits down and says, you have a very limited discretionary amount of energy. You know, you really need to think about where you're budgeting your time. So if you're spending all of your time in meetings with bureaucrats, being angry, getting nowhere, huffing and puffing, being burnt out, and you have no energy and time for your family and your community, do you think that maybe you might want to spend less time in that space? And for some people, it's like, what? Wow. So at that moment, there's a question of agency and how they're expending their agency. And it's fascinating how we fall into and we lean into conflict. It's almost addictive, right? So I think part of community development is really enabling people to think about that. We've only got a certain amount of discretionary energy. People are working, they're volunteering, life is busy. And if we're burning out that energy in communities by getting them to jump through bureaucratic hoops, then not alone are we in community losing out, but society is losing out as well. Okay? It's not good for the community and it's not good for the municipality. So if you're in a municipality or you're in an institution and your colleagues are saying to you, most of our relationships with communities are conflictual, then we maybe really need to think about what's our ownership there in community and what's our ownership in the institution. Okay? There's another dimension to this as well. Sometimes what happens is the community will call up maybe the police department. They'll say, one part of the community says about another part, we've got some gang-related issues, we've got some youth problems. Now you can guess what age the person on the phone is. You really got to come down here and deal with this because, you know, it's just not acceptable. They're graffiti and they're loud and, you know, all sorts of problems. So come down and fix it. I pay my taxes and hurry up about it. Okay. It would be a very unwise move by a police officer to fall into that trap of doing anything about that, except saying, yeah, I'll do something about that. I'm going to bring you and anybody else that you think agrees with your complaint, together with the complainants. We're going to sit down in a dialogical circle and we're going to work it through. And I'm not leaving until all of you figure out a way through it. That's what I'm going to do with your tax money. And if you don't want to show up, then don't call up. Now, that's a public servant confronting a citizen with their democratic freedoms. The freedom to make peace as well as demand the enforcement of the law. Often we talk about the freedom of speech. We also have the freedom of listening. And those dialogical circles are really important. And so often we don't use them enough. So we talk about community development as if there's just this species of professionals called community development workers. But actually I would argue that every public servant, every civil society professional should actually know how to do community development for the very reason that I've illustrated here. So in any case, I think discovering what people care about enough to act upon in neighborhoods is really important, and actually enabling them. I remember once in Melbourne, well actually it was about an hour outside of Melbourne, a place called Montrose. And I arrived there on a Saturday morning, and I'd been asked by the council to go and meet a number of community groups. And I walked in and I could feel the atmosphere, the tension. You could cut it with a knife. And these people were spitting fire. They were angry as hell. And I was the only person in the room, wearing a jacket. So I got it in the neck. They thought I was from the roads authority. And they had just heard that there was, a road going to be driven right up the center of their community. And I explained to them, hang on a second here. I'm not from officialdom. And we talked about it. But about a week previous to going out, my son, who's now 14, he was a little baby at the time, had just had an open heart bypass, a surgery, to reconstruct his heart. And here I was listening to these people. It was very triggering for me. I probably shouldn't have traveled a week after. I was probably traumatized and I didn't realize it. But I was sitting there and I was just thinking, here it was 3 hours later, and they were still talking about this bypass. And I was thinking, this is going around and around in circles. And I get that they're angry, but come on, what am I going to do? And I could feel the tension just getting worse and worse and worse. And I don't know where it came from really, but probably a little bit of trauma and a little bit of frustration. I just said, there's life after a bypass. This could happen to you. I don't know. It may happen. But if this is what you're going to spend the next 3 years doing, it won't be the bypass that kills you. It'll be this. And then I told them about my son, which is kind of a bit of emotional blackmail as I thought about it afterwards. It's not very good practice, but I thought, I gotta do something here. And then we met, I think, on a common field of humanity, right? Now, I think there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. You used the word, sir, you used the words sympathy and empathy earlier on. I think you used the word empathy. I think sympathy is feeling sorry for people and colluding with them, not actually being honest and being adult. I think empathy is the willingness to say, stop, this isn't going anywhere. And you are powerful, and you're not on your knees, and you're not on your back, and there is a possibility here. What else matters to you in the town of Montrose? We managed to get so far that they actually brought me on a community walk to show me all of the great things about the town. I actually write about it in the book, The Connected Community, and there's a really good outcome. So I would encourage you, if you haven't read the book, to get a copy. But in any case, I think it isn't enough to discover the assets of community. You also have to find out a way that those assets can be connected at the speed of trust in local communities. There are lots and lots of great things happening in every community, but most of them are disconnected, right? So there can be lots of people with great ideas and great passions, great skills, but often they're not contributing those skills. They're not getting the opportunity to share. I think of an example in Scotland of where in one particular neighborhood where we worked, there was a group of 6 men who were labeled as having mental health issues. They were in a neighborhood, but they had no relationship whatsoever with anybody else in the neighborhood. And there was a community builder. This is one of the practical ways that we do asset-based community development. So the NHS in the UK have trusts in different areas, and they thought, well, actually, let's try a different approach to health. Instead of taking a biomedical approach, let's take a community-centered approach. And so they financed 6 community builders to work in 6 neighborhoods. And we've got some research that we can share with you if you're interested, a 3-year independent study that was financed by the Scottish government to study the impact of putting community builders, community development workers into a neighborhood and working with the power of the neighborhood. Now, what they were largely doing was trying to discover and support the community to connect assets. So here's the story. So Sean, the community development worker in this particular neighborhood in Scotland, is walking along the street, and he notices a guy walking along the street a little bit further up from him with a parrot on his shoulder. Now, this is not something you see every day in a neighborhood. Maybe in some neighborhoods, but not in this neighborhood. And he went, what's going on here? So he followed the gentleman with the parrot, and he said, so where are you going? And he said, oh, I'm going up to this house over here. And he pointed to the house where the men with mental health issues lived. And Sean had been trying to get into this house for a long time. He knew about it, but he couldn't get in formally, you know. So he said, well, can I come with you? And the guy with the parrot said, sure. So this guy with the parrot, he basically came and visited these men every week, and he would just sit with them and they'd talk about the parrot, right? Okay, as you do. And so Sean, right, walks along with this guy and he says, well, if you're leaving a guy with a parrot in, you surely leave me in. So the guy answered the door and said, yeah, sure. And Sean came in with John, the parrot guy, and Sean started talking to the men. And he discovered that one guy was passionate about gardening. And he discovered another guy loved art. And so because Sean worked in the neighborhood, started putting his thinking cap on, because he noticed 2 things while he was in the house. One was there were no pictures on the walls. It was just magnolia-colored walls, but nothing on them. Because I guess if you're in a home, you'll hang your family photographs or pictures that you like. But these folks didn't really have a home. They were just in a mini institution. They had no way of owning the space, so you could see it was sanitized. And so he thought, wow, this is a wonderful canvas for art, right? And then he looked out in the back garden and he saw the grass up this high. So he said to one of the workers, oh, you've got a beautiful garden. Why are you not looking after it? You've got a guy who loves gardening here. And he said, well, hang on, they're not allowed garden because it's risky. And we're care workers, we're not gardeners. It's not in our job description to do gardening. So Sean said, well, here, I have an idea. I work in the neighborhood around here. I know lots of local artists and I know lots of gardeners. Would it be okay with you if I connected the gardener and the artist in this house with gardeners and artists out there in the community? Guys, sure, knock yourself out, not a problem for me. And so Sean began the journey of building a connection between people who were absolutely isolated. So they were in the neighborhood, but they were not of the neighborhood. We do this a lot, by the way. We take people out of institutions with labels, we put them in neighborhoods, we say, community care, aren't we great? Tick the box. But there's neither community nor care in what they're experiencing. Today, if you go into that neighborhood, you might meet the gardener who once lived in that prison, and he might be walking along the street with the kernels of the coffee grinds at the end of the day from the local coffee shop, which are really brilliant for fertilizer. And he's bringing them back to his community garden, which is now open to the community and they can get access. One of the primary reasons that people stay unwell if they're distressed with their mental health is social isolation. And yet, we put these men all together with the same diagnostic label. We put a care worker, often poorly paid, and a set of medications. And somehow this makes them better. How? And over again, this is what we're doing. We do the same thing with youth programs. We think if we put all of the young people together, they'll raise each other somehow. What I'm arguing for is that we actually recognize what nature teaches us, that plurality and diversity works. That when people get the opportunity to mix across age groups, when we don't ghettoize or, apartheid people, but we actually recognize that people can connect, not by diagnostic label, but by their gifts. Earlier on, we had some folks join us from Breda, some community folks who were telling us their story. And I was really struck by one of the members of the community. What he did was, let's see if I can find this. So he came and he sat beside me. And this was done very quietly. He would be embarrassed if I told this, I suppose, but I think it's important. And I don't know if I can find this because it's hidden away. Last night, he baked me cookies. And I thought, how convivial. So I think his impulse was to personalize the relationship between he and I. And he did that by giving a gift. Now you can imagine if I said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to receive gifts. You'll have to take that back home." A gift is not a gift until it's given, but nor is it a gift until it's received. So I think this is where connection matters. So many of the people that we want to support to have an experience in community life, coming out of prisons or coming out of institutions, or who are aging in their own homes, and they're really almost like prisoners in their own homes after dark. I think they're hungering for something which medicine can't give them and which programs can't give them, but maybe the gift of community can give them. But that isn't just going to happen. It isn't just going to happen. And it certainly isn't going to happen in an awful lot of the communities that I've seen, where the design, the physical design of the place has perfectly designed community out of the community. So we need to find ways that we can animate that discovery and that connection process so that people can act together, can exchange gifts. And I think part of that, and I'll stop and take some questions now, but part of that might be recognizing that maybe we've gotten to a point in some of our neighborhoods and some of our villages where we need to start thinking seriously about employing people who actually enable local people to discover, connect, and mobilize those gifts. Because for the most part, I think a lot of times they're hidden in plain sight. So this is the work, and I'll just finish on this briefly, this is the work that we're doing or I suppose more to the point, that people are doing around the world in 38 countries where I work, is the recognition, I suppose, that there's a huge amount of benefit for a municipality, for example, and I use the example of Leeds here as I finish. Leeds City Council, which is the third, I think I'm right in saying it's the third largest city council in the UK. It's quite big in the United Kingdom. They began to realize that a lot of the way they were working with older people and providing adult social care was very, very siloed and very medicalized. So they were just thinking about people in terms of their need. They would do a needs assessment and they would conclude this person needs whatever. One of the things that they woke up to is that the way they were looking at problems was a problem. That actually the way we think about problems itself can be problematic. And what they were doing was they were looking at individuals in isolation of their neighborhoods and then trying to fix the problem. So they'd say, well, we've assessed an older person, and this older person needs to be in a congregate care setting. They're at risk of falling, they're at end of life, the best quality of life they can have is in some kind of old folks home, right? And so they pay £47,000 a year and they put her in there. Now on the balance sheet, that looks like a good investment if I'm just thinking about people as individual passive consumers. But if I think about and by the way, it also looks like a good investment to put that person in some kind of transport and send them to a care home 200 miles away from where they live, because it's cheaper there and it's more efficient there. Who cares? They're dying anyway, right? Okay, better than leaving them at home. Well, no, I don't agree with that logic. And in Leeds, they began to really reflect on, is this a right way of thinking about people? What would happen if we started thinking about people as citizens, as people who live in places, as people who are connected, even if they're isolated, who are connected to where they live, and who may have social networks that will actually keep them alive and well and living longer and contributing? So they started to change their model of social care and the way they thought about aging. And instead of thinking about aging as just something that older people do, they started thinking, hey, the whole neighborhood, all our neighborhoods are aging all of the time. But how about we do something that enables the community, the neighborhood, one neighborhood at a time, to figure out how they can actually age together. I love the story of Robin. Robin was an individual older person who had become isolated. His wife had died. He'd become quite depressed and quite isolated. But they changed the way they worked with people like Robin. And instead of putting Robin in an institution, they started finding out what Robin's passions were. They discovered that Robin used to work, interestingly enough, for the Parks Department of Leeds City Council. And one of the things he used to do at his pastime is whittle walking sticks. And he had lots and lots of walking sticks in his shed, but he had no way of teaching the skill of whittling or indeed sharing the walking sticks. So a very insightful social worker said, hey, how about I connect you and enable you to mobilize a group of people who are interested in learning how to do carpentry? Now Robin is not alone, not in an institution, but he's a leader in his neighborhood, and he's connecting lots and lots of people together. And this is one of the great challenges, I think, is how can we make sure that we're supporting people and helping people, not by defining them out of community and into an institution, but by defining them as citizens in a community with gifts to contribute. I think that's the essence of asset-based community development. I'm excited by what I'm seeing, and I think there's huge potential here as well. But I'm curious what you think. So let's do what we did again. Turn to a few people. What struck you? What sort of popped for you there? And then we'll take some more questions. Thank you for your time and in listening. I really appreciate your kind attention. Enjoy the conversation.
mõlemad? Okei. Jaa, aitäh. Me läheme edasi ja meil on tore võimalus kuulata kogemusi meie kogukondadest. Ja praegu saavad sõna perepesa inimesed ja Daniel, kes on Innotiimiga teinud koostööd perepesadega. Et me läheme edasi, võimalus kuulata. Nii, selle mikrofoni jälle sulle.
Hello, I'm Maria. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Mr. Cormac, for this presentation. I don't know if you have here somewhere. Should we wait a little? Yes. Hello for a second time. My name is Maria. I'm representing NGO, which is called Lapse Heaolu Arengukeskus, Center of Excellency of Child Wellbeing. Thank you, Mr. Cormac, for this lecture. I was yesterday also. I must say that now I feel a little puzzled, and there were quite a few enlightening moments for me from your presentation, and I'll share them with my 2 slides. But my task here is now to make the very brief introduction. What is this Perepesa Center? And later I'll give word to Daniel and Triin, and they'll share their experience how to build up the community of families around this Perepesa Center. So what is Perepesa? Perepesa is a community-based center for parenting education. It's for families with under-school children to support the parents during the pregnancy and the preschool years with services and community support. I'll give a little context, then I'll move to the next slide and give a little bit more broader picture what is this Perepesa about. Currently there are 6 Perepesas. We started with a pilot for 2.5 years with 3 centers. Now we have grown and there are 6 centers. And within the next 3 years, we have the mandate from the state to create and establish 19 new centers, and 8 of them in Tallinn. And this Perepesa Center, they are in different parts of local municipalities all over Estonia. And they operate based on the model developed by our NGO, and we worked out this model based. We studied the experience of the countries all around the world, especially from Nordic countries, how to create like the support for the families during their early childhood and the first years. And what we do, what is our role there, is that our NGO supports the local governments at startup of Perepesa and maintaining its quality. So it's like the network of Perepesa, we'll establish them, we'll support the teams, and then report back to their local governments. And the local government is paying for the costs in spot. We are kind of consultants there. Yes. And from 2022, we are the state strategic partners. So the state has showed that they trust what we do and gave us the mandate. Here is the, I talked about the model. So here is the model here in the picture. If I just briefly say what is the social challenge that the Perepesa was created, that the most fundamental time to support the family is during the first years of when the child is born. This is the time when the foundation of the child is laid. And if we lose this time, if the family is without support, is alone, is isolated, some other problems, then it's quite hard in the future to, it's a therapy case. Yes. So Perepesa model focuses on good parenting practices, evidence-based practices, the mental health. We have the consultants of mental health, the programs, evidence-based programs, how to educate the parents to be familiar what are the developmental needs of the child, and how to notice them timely and address them. So if you see this picture here, the first, like the foundation of this Perepesa model is the place for families to meet. It's like this community center. And the idea is that it's the most cheapest intervention to create the space which does not stigmatize, just the parents to come there to get together, not to be alone, since almost half of the parents say that they feel this loneliness and they don't have this support system around them. This is like the present day situation. I think it's universal all over the world. And yeah, meet with other parents, share their joys, have a cup of tea. And it's the quite good feedback that the parents say that just the knowledge that I have a place to go and someone is keeping the eye on my child, I can, you know, have the normal talk with others. Already, this is something that helps. And then there is this like open play space. They can come with their children. There is the sitter who also intervenes and has the conversation with the parents. There are also different activities in this open play space. There is the counseling room. I mentioned the psychologist. There is the education room where the different programs take place. Why I say that is your lecture made me, I had these enlightenment moments which necessarily weren't the brightest ones, because I realized that what we do is exactly, we have the model and we kind of impose them. But what makes it a little bit perhaps like softer is that when we started, yes, we have the model, but we go to the local government and we do talk with families and we learn their needs and their expectations. We work in close collaboration with the local governments, which is that it's like the tailor-made. We adjust this model. And we work very closely with the specialists in the neighborhood, in the local government, and create a space to bring them together so they can find a solution. So I hope that this makes it a little bit not so much like imposing. And the last quick slide is that from your yesterday's talk, you mentioned that trust and relationship first. And I was very happy to find out that we have put together like the values together with all the family of Perepesas. And the value is first that every person is valuable, every family which comes in, and regardless of their weaknesses or flaws. And we choose to believe in it and base our actions and attitudes on it. And the second one, especially that we really believe and act according to that every family has internal capacity to handle situations. And what we do is we try not to impose these good evidence-based programs, but we support the families with understanding, encouragement, listening. So yes, that's the short intro, what is Perepesa. Thank you.
So hi from my side also. I guess the fact that we are sitting here, three of us together, isn't the way things started from actually my point of view. It actually was a result of a year-long process that the process came together. And it started personally for me, and maybe this is a short of to give you context, or how did we end up, or how did we come together to start to think about community development in Perepesa? and what was the process, what were the steps, and in the end, we would like to all share what were the learning, maybe some of the learning points for us. So I think the year was 2021 or 22. I remember 22, I think. But back at that time, I was still working for Estonian Public Sector Innovation Team. And just to give a few sentences about it, we were in the government office, and our goal was to be sort of a connector or enabler, facilitator for a public, for ministries and sub-organizations to help develop the services more human-centered. And not from the organizational level only, but consider what is the need and everyday context of a single person. And 2022, and so we did a program, innovation program. It was like a structure to go through, and we started with a question that the Minister of Social Affairs, that their Department of Children and Families Welfare, I think straight translation at least, came with a problem that they see that how can we make the lives of single parents more carefree? And so one sentence about it, one more sentence about who is a single parent. Quite often we tend to think it's like that all children have sort of officially two parents, but there are cases, and approximately 10,000 children in Estonia that have only one parent officially, which means that their rights are, well, there are many legal rights that that I don't have time to get into. But we broadened our approach to see what is the everyday life of a single parent. Nevertheless, if the husband is going to work to another country or however. So we started to unpack the whole, let's say, topic from that point of view. And just to give you context, I think this goes to, maybe Cormac says about discovery phase was something that maybe it helps to unravel maybe how did we end up into the community. Maybe next slide, I would ask you to put. What we did and what innovation team still does is that the public officials have to do the research themselves. Let's say we're doing the research together. It's not that the research is being intermediated, translated, somehow portrayed to the public officials, but it's being done by them, which means that they have to face the person that they're actually creating the system for. And this is the topic or the moment of empathy that happens there. And by the time that I worked for innovation team, that's been maybe one of the biggest game changers also that we've seen. But what have the parents brought out themselves as what have been the problems? Actually, Mare already pointed out to some of the everyday context that single parents bring out themselves. When you are in the antenatal or the prenatal period, there is a lot of lack of knowledge. How will I manage? Incompetence of how should I prepare for the life of a single parent, for example. And it ends up in the feel of guilt that I have been putting my child to this situation. One of the biggest topics that came out was that there is no time for oneself, which means that everything is connected with taking care of a child. And if you are raising a child alone, then you are doing it alone. There is no buffer zone, let's say, from a partner, from someone else. The existence of support network is crucial to provide this buffer zone. Like, I'm also a parent, and I think that we are two of us taking care of our son, and we also felt that, we'd like to share, listen other parents' experiences. So there was a need to belong to somehow connect with other parents also. So this is even more true to people who are taking care of their children alone. And what people brought out was that they wanted to belong to a parental community, but not necessarily to the single parents one, which means that they don't want to just whine all day long how hard their life is about. They just want to share stories. They just want to hear, just want to have some time with other parents. And of course, fears related to child's well-being is also something that really grows out from that story. So when you have all this information on your table, and that's only one tiny part of the information, then you start to think, okay, what now? And one of the great ideas that we had from our maybe ideation sessions was we wanted to create, listen now, a local municipality Mary Poppins service. That everyone would have their own babysitter that they can just book. And actually, if you start to think about it, it actually serves very strong, maybe, a need. And but fortunately, we understood that there's never going to be enough money to create that kind of service. And as Churchill said a while back ago, then if we don't have money, now we have to start to think about. Now we finally have to start to think. And so we understood that the logical continuation by looking at the information we have on our table is that there is a need for community. And but of course, we didn't know how to start a community, how to even think or approach it. So I opened up a Google and typed community development for dummies. And what did I find out? Dagmar's contact. I'm maybe artistically exaggerating too much, but this is maybe the first time that we got together or met 2 years ago with Dagmar. And what I was really hoping for, step-by-step guide to do's and don'ts and everything for community development. Rather, I got an approach, a mindset to think about, and that was that we should rather think about assets than deficits, and there is some literature to it, and so we started to move forwards. We started to try to understand how to make these principles into actions, and I'm going to give the mic to Riin.
Hello, I'm Riin, and I'm also very happy to be here. And I am going to give you a short overview of what we did next. As I was at the moment studying community development here in Tartu, I was really happy to be part of this. And as we tried out the ABCD approach, it was like my first try to do it in real life. So it was a great opportunity. And we had 3 community meetings. On the first one, we tried mapping personal and community values. And we started with those parents who had come together on personal level, thinking about what are the most important things for us as a parent or as a person. And then we had some small group discussions, and then we put all these things together. And we had our community values. I'm not going to read them all, but just point out some. There was kindness and care, trust, shared responsibility, also curiosity, creativity, being there for each other, and some other really important things. And these were common to all the people who were there in the room. There was about 20 people in all the meetings. Not all the same people in all the meetings, but these were opened. On the second meeting, we were trying to map personal and community assets, resources. And as Estonians are considered to be modest when saying out loud what I'm strong at and what are my strengths, then we were a little bit worried how this will turn out, but actually it turned out really good. People were really open-minded, and they really wanted to share what they are good at. And what we also saw was that people made connections upon their interests and strengths. And the other things we did, we mapped all these community assets which were important to these parents. Institutions, natural environment places, built environment places, and we have this kind of community map which was interactive and which they could use afterwards as well. And on the third meeting we had, then we also already tried to figure out together, actually they tried to figure out what were the things that they were passionate about to act upon and to do together. What were the things they want to take initiative, or what they would just like to be part of. And there were lots of ideas coming up, and they were really active, which was a great joy for us to see. And we had post-its, and this is a photo of those. We grouped them together, and the ideas were just from really simple ones, that they wanted to just drink coffee in the mornings together, and they ended up they wanted to rent a bus, for example, and go together in Latvia to Latvia. So really, and everything in between. And we also agreed what was the first thing to do. They wanted to start a meeting in local Perämesa. And also there were, we formed a Facebook group. It was their choice that they wanted to be in Facebook group, and this was the channel. And they already started some things together, even between those 3 meetings, which was already really good. And lessons learned. I will start, and then the others will continue. I think maybe one of the most important lessons for me was that I really saw that people needed community so much. Those those parents with little children. And I have a very vivid memory of one young woman with 3 small children coming to the first meeting. And when we started what are the expectations and what do they want to see and do, and she was like, oh wow, I can have coffee and just talk to other donors. I'm already so happy, and I don't even care what's going to be next. And this was like, wow, these are these kind of moments they really need. And the other, I think, most important lesson for me was that we really have to keep in mind that community development goes in the speed of trust. We want big things to happen quickly and to see many people participating and being active all at once when they have just met. And we just have to give time.
Yeah, we are totally unaware if anything will if we will, what is, or like, how do we know if we succeed or not? And I guess I remember when we went for the 3rd meeting, we knew we had really short, limited time, because we knew that we had to somehow wrap the whole project for ourselves somehow together, and we had agreed with Perämesa for 3 meetings, and then the Christmas were, and we just didn't have more resources to do. And as Riin also showed, that after the 3rd meeting, during the 3rd meeting, the Facebook post was made that it's now decided, and we're gonna meet every second Sunday. Every second Sunday of the month, and you may see the thrill that we might have had. But maybe what was the learning experience for me also is that it's possible to go from the central government to the communities also, but it needs and it takes mediators and connectors to do that. It's not directly. The connectors have to be for the process itself, but also to enter from the central government to the community level, there have to be local anchors to surround people around, because I remember our discussions. We were so afraid of telling people we're going to come from Tallinn and we're going to communicate, make communities. You know, that was our sort of the biggest thing that held us back. But we made peace with that. We wouldn't come in that way, and we will surround everything around Perepesa, not that someone else. And the second thought, or maybe a huge question that we had, is how to connect and find people who are in a true need. Because we knew that there are single parents also, with, you know, sort of officially single parents, not necessarily that. How we found it was through social workers, and we know by fact that there were a couple of these people in our meetings, but the question still remains that the people who showed up were at these 3 meetings were maybe not the ones in the greatest need, etc. So maybe the learning point is that how to find, involve, and be conscious about these people who are in the sort of extremes of our understandings. Yeah.
Just to wrap it up, that in November last year, it means a few months ago, we decided that we use the same ABCD approach in the other 5 perepesas, because that was in one place, now 5. And what is like my lesson? I personally, I am like intuitively trust in this model, but I have many questions. And I know that the perepesa teams have many questions. And my conclusion is that I think communities are ready. They come because whatever happens there, you know, it's like vibe, you know, going on. But we had to grow, you know, towards this level. We had to answer these questions that how, if we say we are evidence-based like family center, but now community, and if they come there and start to play with the crystals and how it, you know, affects. So we have a lot of questions, and I know that Cormac will come to visit Perepesa, so sorry, but be prepared. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ja suur tänu. Ja meil on üks ettekanne veelgi, et me teeme ruttu vahele. Sina aitad järgmiste slaididega, jah?
Okay, hello everybody. It's very strange to be speaking into 2 microphones at the same time. Thank you for previous speakers. It has been a very enjoyable afternoon, and we will try to make it very quick because I understand that we are rather short on time. My name is Maris. This is my friend, neighbor and colleague, Meel. We work together in Võrumaa Development Center as NGO consultants, and we were one of the 7 counties that undertook the ABCD piloting in Estonia on the first half of this year. And we were trained before going to the piloting program. We were trained by EHA and Kadi, and it was a very nice and insightful experience. In the piloting program, there were facilitator teams, 2 or 3 people. So we were helped by Kristi Randla. She is a graduate from the Tartu University Community Development and Social Wellbeing Master's Program. And it was a very fruitful collaboration. So during the testing time, we had 3 meetings with Mikit Village community. And before the first one, we had a short preliminary meeting with the village leader. And Meil will tell you a little bit about Mikit Village.
Hello. Yeah, very shortly from the background. Mikit Village is located in southeast of Estonia, near Russian border, and it's a very special cultural area. So it has very many traditions, and the people are very traditional. And it used to be a separate municipality, and it was a municipality center, but now it's part of a Setomaa municipality, but it's a bigger municipality. So there has been many changes for the village in the last 7 years. And it has around 250 inhabitants. And in Estonian context, we can say it's a very rich village because it has its own school, kindergarten, youth center, 2 cafes, and a shop. And it's just in its very first steps of building a community because they were a municipality center and very used to that they have a leader and who's doing all for them, and now they are starting to activate, and just 2 years ago they elected their own village leader.
Yeah, so the first meeting, we got together. There was about 20 people that showed up. In the preliminary meeting, there was about 10 people. So everybody brought a friend, and there you go, there were 20 people. And in the first meeting, we started out with discovering the assets, discovering the gifts of lands. On the picture on the right, you can see the gifts of the mind, the gifts of the heart, the gifts of the hands. And as you see, it's a very rich village and a very rich community, and very numerous gifts there. The first meeting was rather uncomfortable for the participants, it seemed. They were very closed. It was very hard for them to start talking about what they're good at. Again, as was mentioned previously, it's not really in the Estonian culture, and even less is it in the Seto culture to praise yourself and talk about the things that you're good at. And also we did have a lot of seniors or older generation, and so for that generation also, like, it's a taboo to praise oneself. But in any case, slowly with the meeting, which took about 4 hours, they started opening up, and they started getting creative. We talked a little bit about the values, we did creative methods, and at the end of the first meeting we also gave them a voluntary task. We gave them a bunch of options of things that they could do in the meantime within the months that was between the first and the second meeting. And on the second meeting, it was then very nice to see that some people actually had activated. They had actually done the tasks. On the left, you can see a very nice drawing by a nice lady who is a fan of frogs. And there's a joke in the Estonian language also, I guess, because the name frog and community have certain similarities. And so there was this wonderful drawing built or drawn by the nice lady. There was a very emotional speech that was given by an older member of the community. It was a celebratory speech, My Mikit Village in 25 years, and it really touched people's hearts and gave a very nice beginning and set the tone for the second meeting. And really the second meeting was by far the best one. You could see that people were much more open. We went further with relationship building, with discovering one's own strengths and personalities and each other's strengths and values. And so we didn't really move on in the pace that maybe was sort of anticipated before. but we realized that we can't move on before deeper relationships were being formed and trust was actually gained. And so yes, we left from that meeting with a very, very good feeling, and the participants already also brought out certain things that they had already gained from the process.
Yes, and when the second meeting was really a fun meeting and much about building trust, then on the third meeting we focused on mapping the assets, the outer and inner resources, and we saw that this was rather hard for them. The task was to draw a map over Mikit Village and to point out all the important gathering places and institutions and companies, and also maybe potential that's not been used. And we saw that it's really hard for people who have lived in the same place whole life to notice what are the richness of this place, because people are more used to notice what they don't have and they don't see what they have. But it was good that there was some new community members, new people who have moved in this area, and they had a wider look. And so we also had a visual for them, like this chair. And when we talked about future activities or events, we wanted them to think about a chair what has 3 strong legs, and these strong legs were the assets or the resources that the village have. But this was a very hard exercise for them, and maybe we felt that we didn't have enough time. This analytical part and focusing on strengths, not needs, is very difficult, and I think we should have had more meetings for this.
Yes, and so what did the participants think? This is now a summary from the 2 times we asked them to ask their feedback, like what has come from this process for you, like what good have you gained from this. And so what was brought out was courage, curiosity, definitely new relationships and discoveries about one another, sense of belonging, also knowing where to get stuff, who lives where, what they do. Newcomers were adapted more easily. There was definitely a sense of excitement that started to build up about the future of Mikit. And also I would like to bring out the last, 3 ones, I guess, that they felt that they have hope, and that they also felt that they already have a community, that the meetings actually brought them to these kind of sensations. And the last maybe needs a little commentary. Aivo represents an older man who I guess has recently retired, and so he was very bored, and so he showed up at the meeting. And then somehow he was being rather skeptical in the beginning, and he didn't like the word community, and he offered his own interpretation and so on, but he was, a fun older man. And the second time, he showed up already with a bottle of wine and was very active participant, and somehow was a very integral part of the community. And so now in the 3rd time, when he couldn't come, he was missed. And so, everybody was like, where is Aivo? This was the thing that was written on the board. Where is Aivo? And it was brought out that Aivo, now everybody knows where he is, where he lives, what he does, and so now he has become noticed. He used to be unknown, and now he's noticed. And that was really nice to see.
And very quickly, our learning moments. We think that it would be very good if we would have had an introductory meeting, because when people are used to a passive role, then maybe in the first meeting we could have explained the role of community, because in first meeting the older people came, but the next time they didn't came because it was too scary for them. And also, you cannot move to the next phase without trust. That I think went well, because we took the whole second meeting just to tell stories and play. And also we felt very deeply that the stories and creative methods work very well with building trust. And it really, the stories and the drawings really united the community. And also what I already told you, that the analytical tasks were hard, but I also understand that these tasks were the learning spots, because learning is hard. And when you have to think very differently, then it is hard. But you have to take time for learning. And the community said that it was very interesting for them to think differently about Mikit Village. And 3 months is not enough. And also in Estonian context, we would say it would be good to start in autumn and end this process in March, because in springtime and summertime it's very busy for countryside people. And for us, I think we struggled the most with the role of facilitator. Like, what can we do and what we shouldn't do. We felt that somebody needs to be the host of the meetings, but when it is us, then it's not the community doing the thing. So our suggestion is that maybe the facilitators should work with a village leader group, and the village leader group should be the host, and maybe the village leader group should pick the methods and plan the day with us together.
Yes, but overall, we saw trust and deeper relationships, and we saw people getting inspired and motivated, and we saw people really taking pride in their community, and thus our conclusion is that ABCD actually works. And thank you for listening.
Suur tänu teile, väga vahva. Ja, me hakkame lõpule jõudma. Yeah, we almost at the end. So I suggest just to give 1 minute for you to end our meeting, and yeah.
Both. Okay. So the first thing I think that I want to do is just honor the fact that we're in a really historic conversation where we've heard people sharing their learning and their practice, their dilemmas and their doubts and their reflection. And so I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for your humility and for your courage in putting your practice out there for others to learn from. So a huge thank you and well done. There are things that I've noticed that perhaps on another occasion I can coach you around that I think would make your life a lot easier. But it's not for now. For now, I think we should end in celebration, and I'll pick up the coaching tips later, okay? But I think overall, really impressed. With some slight calibration, I think you could go even further, and I'll talk about that later. I just really admire your courage, so well done. Thank you.
Yeah. And we are really very thankful for you, for being with us and sharing your work and thoughts. So, yeah, it has been a great honor to be together with you the whole day here. So, thank you. Teeme ühe suure aplausi.